Okay.
What's up? Welcome to a new episode of Movie Schmovie, a very special episode of Movie Schmovie. Episode 419 is going to be our second volume of the Halloween Watch-'em-all series that we're doing here. My name is Steve, one of the co-hosts, and as always, I'm joined by...
Right.
I prayed that he would burn in hell, but in my heart I knew that hell would not have him.
Rejected. Got turned away at the door.
Me.
Yeah.
So good. Dr.
Welcome back
Loomis.
to Haddonfield, everybody. What'd you say, Ronald?
Dr. Loomis's Halloween should be the name of it. Yeah.
Well, he is kind of like of the 6 movies we've watched thus far.
Yeah.
He's the star more so than Laurie Strode. You know, I mean, she's in a couple movies. He's in 5 out of these movies. So I do think this in some ways is the Loomis trilogy as much as it is the Michael Myers trilogy that we're talking about. But we're talking about Halloween's 4 through 6. Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, which came out in 1988. Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. What's he getting revenge for? All those people that hassled me for killing all those people, I'm going to get revenged on that. From 1989. And then from 1995, introducing and starring Paul Stephen Rudd in Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. And I guess when we get to Curse of Michael Myers, we'll talk a little bit about the differing edits of that. I don't know if you guys dug much into that, but I have a little bit to say about both versions. So this is the second part of the Watch-'em-all, and this is kind of its own little trilogy. And Ronald, now you might understand what we meant when Steve and I kind of told you that in advance, that the first 3, there's a classic film, there's an attempt to make a sequel to a classic film, then there's creators that are bored with that, trying to do something different and take the franchise in a new direction, and then that's it. And then a few years later, like a little bit longer gap between 3 and 4, there's a retreat back to what worked about the first one, and then from there, the next 2 movies, they really do form sort of an attempt to, increase the lore, create a continuity, not have these be one and dones, but movies that kind of lead into each other. But much like the recent Star Wars prequel trilogy, made completely without a trilogy plan. So these movies all have like endings that set something up that may not get paid off, and then a different creative team, except for the producers, comes in and changes it around. So this is like a trilogy, but it's also a complete scramble, trying to figure out what's the next step for this franchise. So Ronald, do you get that now? Like how these 3 movies kind of fit together as their own little pocket of story?
For sure. Maybe much more than the first 3.
Yeah.
And it was a concerted effort to like make these things kind of, I'll say blend. I don't want to say connect. I don't want to say
connect would be a very generous word.
Yeah. Blend.
Yeah,
vaguely blend.
It's definitely like an effort to, well, at least to try to get back into the Michael Myers Haddonfield lane of Halloween. Halloween 4, which is The Return of Michael Myers, comes out in what I think it's 88. But it's kind of making this attempt to kind of get back to what people know, which is the idea of Loomis and Michael Myers, and there's a bit of a question, or there's a little bit of a presence of Laurie Strode still happening throughout the film, but it definitely falls right back in, or tries to get back into that just 80s slasher basically thing that Halloween 1 was one of the creators of, or Black Christmas we talked about, but kind of get back into that mold or that template. And both the idea of having like what do you call it, like a central character that is or is not possibly related to Michael Myers, and there's a question around that through the first couple films, and even actually the third one in this section of the Watch-'em-all. But you definitely, I honestly, like 4 and 5, beyond maybe Halloween 1, have always been like probably my favorites. There's one in a later volume that we'll do that is another one that I love in the franchise. And I think it's because it really you really settle in with a couple characters through more than one film. You can kind of feel like a movie like to go from 4 and 5 comes out a year later, and you still have certain characters around that you have a connection to that aren't like the villains of the film or Dr. Loomis, basically. But I don't know. I think 4 really stands out, and I think it has a lot of love from the horror community. Because it gets back to the Michael Myers of it all and Dr. Loomis, but also honestly, because you get to meet Jamie Lloyd. Danielle Harris comes into the fold here in this film and is kind of like a horror icon at this point.
She's great in this film for a child actor. Yeah. She's great.
She's wonderful. And I mean, you go to any horror convention and there's a high probability that like she's there now in 2024. I've been to a few where she's been. I mean, and she's been in other things since then, beyond the Halloween franchise that is still in the horror genre. And I think it's just, even more currency for her into her place as like a scream queen in ways. But that's really what I love about this whole section of the Halloween franchise, even though 6, is not her playing the character, and that character is very different in 6. Or the Curse of Michael Myers, but
it gets done wrong, I think.
For
sure. The franchise,
for sure.
We'll talk about it though.
But yeah, I don't know. I just always have loved Jamie Lloyd, and I feel like even the age I was when I came to Halloween 1, like Laurie Strode is an icon, and she's a scream queen, and she's kind of like the mold that a lot of these characters are built off of, but. As a young kid watching these movies, probably younger than I should have been, I always kind of like really gravitated towards Jamie, and that character in this franchise always kind of like meant not more to me, but I just had a different connection to, because she was a kid and I was a kid, and it was just, I don't know, I'm sure it's very logical, but I don't know, I just want to make sure that for all the great things that are in the, and even Rachel, like, her, the character that Ellie Cornell plays in 4 and 5, like that's another character that like you kind of love, in the franchise, and especially in this one.
She's got, if Laurie is like the 70s ultimate kind of like final girls type, I really think that Rachel is like a very late 80s update in terms of the hair and the clothes, but she's a similar person to what Laurie represents. And She's got this kind of like, I don't know if this is the right word to use, but the word that came to my mind is spunk. She's just got this kind of quality that, even though she's not given dialogue that's quite as sharp and fun as the characters in the first one, there is an attempt in Halloween 4 to set up like real characters with real relationships. And like the fact that Jamie is like, she's this adopted kid who like, I don't know if we're supposed to think she's recently adopted or if she's just never settled in, but she's saying to Rachel, do you love me like a sister? And that feels either like she's just been adopted or like she's never quite fit in or felt like she's fit in. And that, it might be kind of corny, but I think the broad strokes of that with good acting and frankly, like mostly like really good lighting. I feel like this movie has a lot of scenes that look really good. I think they go a little haywire with the fog machine in some scenes. They pump in a little too much fog. And the light hits it and it looks a little stagey. But in general, there's some like beautifully lit moments in this movie. And I think a real attempt to not just bring us back to Haddonfield and Loomis and this is the daughter of Jamie Lee Curtis's character, Laurie Strode, we find out. It's very loosely sketched in, but like she dies in a car accident off, between movies. And this is her daughter who's been adopted. It also is a stylistically, like they're trying to lean more on suspense and less on the gore that we got in Halloween 2 and 3, and less on the crazy stuff that, it's not escalating so much as it's kind of simplifying in terms of the way the violence is played on screen. And again, it's a relatively bloodless movie. I think they actually went back, they had what they called blood filming. They went back and did a few inserts to create more gore, because the initial instinct of the producer, Mustafa Akkad, was to kind of lean on that Hitchcockian thing that was inspiring Carpenter and Deborah Hill so much, of letting a lot of the worst stuff happen in your imagination,
Yeah.
But Ronald, you came to this just recently. Steve, I know you saw this movie probably at some point in the past. I know I have a real strong memory of my first viewing. Steve, what was your first viewing of this movie? You said like when you were a kid, like.
Yeah, honestly, yes. I remember being very young watching this, like with my mom, and we had like, our little thing. We watched like Halloween horror movies all the time together. especially around the time of year, you know.
Had you seen all the other Halloween movies up to this point?
Yes, yes. And you know, I think this one always, like, it's a weird connection, but I wanted to just mention it before I forget it. I remember seeing this movie after I don't know if you guys have seen Silver Bullet.
Yes.
With Gary Busey and Corey Haim,
Yeah.
the werewolf Stephen King story. The way that film kind of created the town and like the characters in the town and the cops and the kids and the adults and everything in that town that Silver Bullet takes place in. Halloween 4, when I remember seeing it the first time, like I remember having this feeling like this feels like the same town. You know, like because you kind of knew who like the cool kids were and who was trying to get, you know, date somebody, and like, you know, there was the preacher in Silver Bullet, and like, you know, this you have the sheriff and the girl, his daughter, who's getting with Grady, and all. There's all these things that just start connecting in the town, and I thought that was like such a good part of this one, specifically Halloween 4. But yeah, sorry, back to your question. Yeah, very young. I want to say like I probably saw this not long after it came out. You know, I definitely before I was like a teenager or anything like that. Probably in the late 80s, early 90s was the first time I saw it. But this is the one that I always rewatch. Like, you know, this is like a perennial thing. I will always watch at least Halloween 4, maybe 5 back to back, because I really do genuinely love these two, especially 4.
I saw this one in the theater, and it was one of the first horror movies I remember seeing in the theater. Like I remember, I had seen, I believe, Elm Street 3 and 4 had maybe already come out in theaters by this time. I don't know, but I just remember the experience of seeing it. So definitely, because I was my cousin, who was my kind of horror movie buddy, he was in town. Actually, my cousins were in town a lot because my grandmother was sick, and so there was a lot of you know, my aunts and uncle were they were always visiting to be with my grandmother, and therefore their kids were in town, and that meant I saw my cousin more. So it was a kind of a sad reason, but we got to see each other more during that semester, more so at school. And like we went to go see this movie. I guess when did this one come out?
88.
It came out October. So it would have been in the fall of 88. So it was around Thanksgiving, but I think it was like before Thanksgiving that we went to go see it. Maybe even opening weekend. And the movie theater, which was the Hoover Square 6, was next to Turtles Music and Records. And I remember going over there before the movie and probably borrowing money to buy the They Might Be Giants album, Lincoln, which is maybe one of my favorite albums. But I just have a very strong memory of like going to buy that album and then walking over to the Hoover Square 6 with my cousin Ryan and my cousin Jay and going to see this movie. And we didn't the three of us, I don't think, ever went to go see another movie. This was like the only time that it all overlapped. You know, because he wasn't much of a nerd, but he did kind of think slasher movies were kind of cool. My older cousin Jay and my younger cousin Ryan and I were totally into that stuff. And I just remember going over there, and this was the first Halloween movie I saw. Maybe I had seen one of the earlier ones like in a rental situation, but they didn't really stick with me. So I felt like I was getting introduced to Michael Myers in this film. Oh, wow. And you know the beginning of this, when the gurney's coming out and they're on the little walkway and the music kicks in? I remember that moment. Like I would. It's one of those things where if you do the math, if someone says, "What's your favorite band?" Okay, what's your favorite album by that band? What's your favorite song on that album? Well, that may be your favorite song just by like mathematical process of elimination. If favorite shots of movies are based on like the ones you think of the most and the ones that like you just have an emotional response to, that's one of my favorite moments in movie history, and I can't explain it except to say that was the first time I heard John Carpenter's Halloween theme. And it was Michael Myers being rushed out of a hospital on a gurney on a rainy night. And it's like other movies have had a similar moment to that. So it feels like an iconic kind of moment. This is these people think they're moving Michael Myers to someplace, but they're actually just setting him up to be free, you know? That moment, when it happened, I wouldn't have even thought about it. But when it happened again, I was like, oh my God, that is it. That's like, every time I hear that music, that's the moment that I'm kind of locking back into this feeling of like, ooh, this is a different kind of horror than, you know, I was really into Freddy at that point. I had probably watched some of the Friday the 13th movies, but I don't know. And I kind of want to maybe suss out with you guys, like, what is it that makes, what is the distinctive quality of Halloween that makes it feel so different. And I think obviously the shape, the answer is the Michael Myers himself is this slightly more enigmatic figure than Freddy or even Jason. But I don't know, that just the power, the primal power of the imagery of this one really worked on me, even though I think this is one of the worst looking Michaels in any of the movies. The mask looks really kind of crummy throughout the whole movie, too white, and the hair's the wrong color. And also, did you notice the guy looked like he was shrugging the whole time? Like every time.
Yeah.
So it's because they didn't hire a big enough guy, and so they put hockey pads on him under the under the work clothes. But it looks like a guy wearing hockey pads under a thing. But anyway, I think that all of that, it just, there's an effectiveness to this one. There's a simplicity to it. I think Jamie Lloyd goes a long way to make you feel like this is trying to do something classier than like a slasher sequel, and maybe that's
Right.
maybe that's an uphill fight for the people that are making these movies, but I think maybe that ambition, that desire to make like an actually good movie, and to even think about the word Hitchcock in association with one of these movies, puts it in a slightly different class than the kind of, blood and guts and boobs that you think of when you think of the slasher genre. But I don't know, does that ring true to you guys, that like, whether it works out or not, it always seems like they're trying to go for something with these movies, and they're trying to maybe keep a tone that's like, so more serious or something? I don't know. The Halloween movies just have a different flavor from the other big slashers, and they always have for me.
I mean, I guess when I think about these movies, I think that he has the most iconic music to me. Like, there's nobody that has like the appearance with the music that feels so like familiar. And I think about all the other icons. Nobody has like a theme like that. Nobody has like sounds like somebody's kind of packing out of a keyboard. Like, I feel like a little kid could play it, but also it's very sophisticated at the same time. Like, it's like, it's something you could replicate. So somebody said this about famous people. Famous people you can replicate through outfits. And I think about that a lot. Like, obviously you see the shape, you see his outfit, the jumpsuit, the mask, but then also like, if you hear the music before you see the shape, you're like, I'm gonna die. Even if somebody's playing around, you're like, stop fucking around. Like, what are you doing? Stop playing that. Like, even I've heard people do that. Like, even when the music's playing, they're like, stop. Because you know what's ahead. It's a chaos to it. This one,
he's gonna kill everybody.
He's gonna kill everybody.
Like, if he shows up, he's gonna just kill everybody, or most everybody. He occasionally lets somebody live, but it doesn't always seem like. It always seems like it's a last-minute decision on his part to go do something else right now. I don't have time to kill you. So I'm gonna do this other thing.
The one thing I will say about this is, Dr. Loomis has a universal all-access pass to every place. To the point where I thought that, like, is he a part of the whole thing? Is he? He literally would show up, like, two police officers would talk, and they're like, man, this is bullshit. This guy's, he's like, actually, no, he's evil. He's it's like,
he doesn't walk in a room and say hello or anything. You just hear him come in. You don't even know he's there until you hear somebody say, evil.
He always wedges himself in between two people talking, and I love that. But he really does have an all-access pass. He can go to hospitals. He can go to precincts. He can go to people's houses. He can go into people's houses without anybody really checking him.
He can hold a police officer at gunpoint and just kind of go about his day.
Nobody goes, why the fuck are you in my house? He just
kind of do. But that person is usually proven wrong. Some of these sheriffs are like, what's the big idea? But they usually like fall in line. Like, I think I like the way that Sheriff Meeker, it's like he's kind of a riff on what Brackett was, but it's a different kind of guy. And I feel like Meeker seems more practical. He's more...
For sure.
Brackett's almost like a small town sheriff that's not prepared for this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Meeker's like a guy who's like, all right, I don't want this to happen on my watch because it's real. Like, they know to trust him on some level. Part 5 has the craziest Loomis entrance. I don't know if you remember. It's like Jamie's like being worked on by the doctors in like the dream clinic or whatever, and he just pops up between two doctors that are working on her. And he's like, no, or
he wedges himself in between two people talking every time. It's so crazy, and it's so.
And he's wearing a trench coat, and he's got black gloves on. You know,
it's so good. It's like finally somebody's taking this situation serious. You know what I mean? Like that's what Dr. Loomis represents, because everybody's like, Michael Myers, that guy 20 years ago he came, and then he's like, no, Michael is burn his body, shit on him, and then throw ashes on him, and then burn his body. And it's like cool about it. He's losing his mind. And then he starts hacking people. He's like, I told you. And then I love that. He always has like a, see, bitch, I told you that this would happen to you. I've warned you 10 times. Dr. Loomis is very entertaining.
Over these films, we see him kind of devolve. Well, between 4 and 5, he really devolves. Like he really is at his worst in 5. In 4, he's like still the kind of crazy guy you should have listened to. And he's got the burns that make it very convincing. He's been through this experience.
Oh, we got to talk about the evolution of his face as well.
Let's get into that. I think that's an interesting thing. The solution to how to pick up from the end of Halloween 2, which is what this film tries to do. In the years between, there were a lot of different attempts at how they might do that, and there were some that different parts of the creative team were interested in. Like John Carpenter eventually left like in 86 or 87 because he just felt like it was not moving forward, and he didn't want to make the same movie again, which seemed like what they wanted to do. But there was a script that was written by a guy named Doug Etchison that kind of set all these different things in play that you would see them pick up on in the different versions that they made. But there were actually 3 radically different versions of the story. But the first one, I'll just tell you a couple things about each one. One of them involved a scene at a drive-in where Michael would kill all the people at the drive-in while a Friday the 13th movie was playing on the screen. And at one point, he would be in front of the screen and he would be matching the action of what Jason was doing on the screen. Then when people opened fire on him with machine guns, I guess the cops or a SWAT team or whatever, he grows in power as the bullets hit him, and he grows to 12 feet tall.
What?
What the hell?
There's another one. The next draft, he kills a rock star and steals his Porsche and like changes his outfit to like rock star leather clothes. He drives around in a Porsche dressed in leather. And that one was supposedly a very MTV aesthetic, you know, kind of an attempt to cash in on that. Okay. And then the next draft was one that it wasn't quite what we got in for, but it was like the next one was the one that introduced the idea of Laurie dying off screen. It's so hard to get the name right because Jamie is the name of the actress. And that's why they named Jamie Lloyd. She's a tribute to Jamie Lee Curtis. Yeah. But Laurie dies off screen. She has a daughter who's adopted, and we follow the adoptive sister and the adopted daughter. But they weren't named Rachel and Jamie. They were named Linda and Amanda. Anyway, but there's a similar thing going on in that one. Like, for instance, Hoffman, the antagonistic psychiatrist, he's in that one a little bit more. So you can start to see that draft kind of turned into what this one became. But then they finally hit on this idea that we're talking about. But you can see they went through all these permutations. The idea of a 12-foot tall Michael, supposedly that was a script that John Carpenter loved. But John Carpenter has always thought, don't make the same movie again. Like, if you ever hear of the supposed Michael in Space movie that they talked about at some point, that was John Carpenter's idea. So he's not a guy who wants to remake his movie, and he's not really a guy who wants to produce someone else remaking his movie. He would rather be involved if it was something crazy and different. So it's interesting that they ended up doing this kind of like safe, if you will, retread rather than something wilder for part 4. But it did turn out to be one of the more beloved sequels, I think, for all those reasons that we just mentioned, that it does feel like it's just trying to go for pace and suspense rather than cheap shocks. And it still has a kind of schlocky aspect to it. And like I said, that mask that they, the reason the mask looks so bad is because they got sent pink masks with blonde hair rather than white masks with dark hair. And so the mask attendant or whatever, this guy Ken Horn, had to actually paint all the masks white and color the hair, and that's why they just look kind of stiff and kind of different. But did you notice there's one shot in the movie where Michael comes out and he is pink-skinned with blonde hair?
No.
I'll send you guys the picture and you can drop it in, Ronald. But
Okay.
it's like they said they were filming, and the guy who kind of tended the masks saw that and was like, "Oh my God, someone went and grabbed one of the wrong masks from the truck, not one of the 6 or 7 that he painted, but one of the the original ones they got sent. It was the wrong color."
That's
So I mean, that's
nuts.
the kind of stuff that happens on a movie like this that
Yeah.
indicates it's still sort of B movie. But I do think in terms of lighting and tone and mood, they are going for something a little more classic. I think that is maybe why this movie it's not like it's aged perfectly, but it's still, like you said, Steve, it's still very watchable. And if you're a slasher fan, it's just I don't know, it's almost like comfort food to put on a movie like this. I can't.
It really is, man. That's like the key. What you just said is that like a really good movie like this, or the slasher film, and especially that little subgenre of horror, for me personally, like it is such a comfort watch. Like there's so many of them, there's different little pockets of horror that I literally watch horror movies to fall asleep. But I mean, like a slasher, a solid, just even average one is like so easy to watch. It's so comforting. And not that this is probably more better than average to me, but you could take any of them and I'd be like, yeah, I love watching those kinds of movies.
Mm-hmm.
Especially like for me too, like that run in like the late 90s, early 2000s, like when there was just a ton trying to replicate or copy Scream. Take your pick of what I Know What You Last Summer, Urban Legend, Valentine, like any of those, like they're just that mold of a decent slasher movie. There's such a comfort, it's just they're so easy to watch. I guess they're not really challenging. It's just it's just like somebody's killing somebody, and it's even better if it's a mystery. It's like, oh, who is the killer?
Right.
Yeah.
Who is it, guys?
Very
Well, a lot of
true.
the early slashers were whodunits, and then
Yeah.
Scream kind of brought that back in.
Yeah.
And then there's the question of whether it's really a whodunit or if it's just a what's going on kind of mystery figure. It might not be a character that you will be surprised
Right,
to find out
exactly.
it is. It's just a story you don't know. But this really kind of gets at some of the stuff that this movie's doing that's kind of new. The supernatural stuff that kind of creeps in with Jamie having like a psychic bond with
Right.
Michael is something new for this series. There's sort of suggestion that when she touches him right before he jumps up and gets shot and falls down in a very cheap, fake-looking mine shaft. But before that happens, I don't know that we see a moment where it seems like they're connected in that way. She does seem to kind of sense him, and she's having these nightmares about him. But that's the moment where supposedly that was meant to be like the transference of his spirit into her or whatever, that then later she does what she does. But, Ronald, did you know about the ending to this movie? Because I feel like with Halloween 4, when I think about iconic aspects of it, it's that they found an ending that I thought, like, it's up there. It's not quite the ending of the first movie, but it's close to the ending of the first movie in terms of in the last moment, you're getting this new bit of information. In the first movie, the new bit of information is, oh, the shape could be anywhere. He could be anyone. He could be anywhere. In fact, the audience has been seeing through his eyes the whole time, and now he's gone. So maybe now the shape is out there with the audience. Maybe the shape is the audience. It's all these little things that kick in. That then when you sequelize that, it's like, well, can you top that? And so the second one clearly tried to top it with an explosion. And the final. I love that the answer to how do you bring back Loomis and Michael is pretty much just don't explain it. Just say that wasn't as deadly as it looked. But here's an interesting note. There was an earlier draft of that began with a flashback with Loomis and Michael burning as the hospital burned, and as like rescue workers came in. Loomis is screaming, "Let him burn! Let him burn! Let it burn!" Which seemed like something they picked up in the David Gordon Green trilogy, because that's what Jamie Lee Curtis is screaming about the house at Halloween Kills. So I think a lot of times if they cut something out of one of these ideas, it goes in the file and it's like it might get picked up for a later movie.
Yeah,
for sure. But I mean, that's the way that one ended. This one, I think the idea that Jamie has this kind of like cursed bloodline. I mean, it's crazy, the supernatural aspect of that, but just the shock of it. Again, as someone who hadn't seen a lot of horror films in the theater at that point, that really stuck with me. Like I remember being really kind of haunted by the end, because it's like all the characters are together in a well-lit house. This should be safe. And suddenly we're not safe. And I mean, Donald Pleasance, he's a scenery chewer for sure. But I love the way that guy goes for it, and I think his like no, like the way he just melts at the end. It's I mean, I don't know. I think it's incredible. I can't explain why it works for me so well.
Love the ending. It's great.
Yeah, it's a crazy ending, and it really is like it's something different. Like you don't think that like, oh man, this transfers somehow. Like this is like a
Yeah, it's hereditary.
it's
Right,
hereditary,
it's hereditary, right? Or it really did transfer, or whatever. But I mean, like, did you expect then to sit down and watch a Halloween 5 where Jamie was the killer, or did you sort of like what did you think of that ending, Ronald? Like going into the next movie?
I for sure thought that Jamie was gonna be like Chucky at that point. Like I thought she was just gonna be really like people would be minding their business, looking for the shape, and then she would come behind them and go, you know what I mean? And that, you know, I didn't get that. That would be really fucking cool if that happened at some point. They decided to do that down the line. But yeah, I thought it was. That's what I was expecting. I was expecting Jamie, the little shape. Yeah.
Shapekins.
Yeah, and hers would be like a play school, sort of like the same bing 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 bing, but on one of those.
Oh, like a toy piano.
Like a toy piano.
Yeah. Why did they never do toy piano?
Oh man,
that would actually sound good.
Creepy as hell.
But yeah, I mean, I think that there was talk of that, and there was actually a draft of a screenplay that tried to play around with that idea that Jamie would be the killer in the next movie.
Oh, wow.
But I think that it was handed down. Even I think somehow theater chains dictated that they would be happy to exhibit a new Halloween movie, but not if the little girl was the killer. And so that was handed to the producers from the theater chains, which is really crazy.
That can't happen again, ever again.
Well, I mean, that's pretty wacky because it feels like something rather than nothing.
Yeah,
but, I do think like there was the next script would have ended with a scene that's similarly ambiguous as far as like Jamie standing between the cops and Michael, and like throws herself in front of him to protect him, and then we realized as the camera cuts, there's nobody behind her. And so it would call into question that throughout the movie, maybe Michael was there, maybe she was the killer. You know, again, they were trying to play with that ambiguity. But by the time the movie arrived at a final script, they had pretty much settled on this idea that we're going to walk back. We're going to say she didn't kill her stepmother, or her adopted mother. She maimed her or whatever. Like the idea there being that she hadn't killed her, so it wasn't as much to walk back. And she's now being, her dreams are being studied in this clinic. So I guess we can roll into Halloween 5, the revenge of Michael Myers. Ronald, what do you think he was getting revenge for in this movie?
This isn't like Friday the 13th where like, there's clearly a reason. Like, I don't quite understand his revenge at this point. Like, I'm like, some of the people that were around when he was around is like, little Michael Myers, it's like they just talk about how he was like stabbed some. I don't understand it. I don't understand. And I think that's one of the things that I really like about Friday the 13th. It's clearly like there were a set of events that led to this person being a very bitter person. Whereas Michael Myers,
like that's your description of Jason Voorhees.
That's Jason.
He's
Jason. So bitter.
He's so bitter.
He's so bitter.
And to quote 8 Mile, Michael Myers just seems like Clarence's parents had a really good marriage type of situation. Like when you really don't know what created the monster that is Michael Myers. I don't really understand it. He's in the suburbs enjoying his life. What caused it? Is it just like psychological?
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing with Michael Myers is that he is like the mystery man. I'm actually pulling up. I'll throw my background image up as that. That's the pink mask.
Oh,
wow,
that is nuts.
That's pink.
It's like, I mean, like it's like a pinkish.
It's like blonde hair.
It's like intended to be blonde haired and I guess like Caucasian skin, but it's more kind of pink
That's
rubber with yellow straw colored hair.
I'd love to see it.
Yeah, I know that attention to detail is incredible. That they were actually like, wait, what are we shooting with here? But yeah, I mean, like I think that the mythology was that there was no explanation. In the first one, that was the point.
Okay.
You know, the second one builds on to the end of that story, but it adds the idea that he's going for his sister, and that changes him to say that he was going back to Haddonfield to get his sister, rather than just he saw a girl that came up to the house because, you know, Jamie's delivering something for her realtor dad to the house, and that's when Michael kind of sees her in the first one, and you could believe he just follows her from there. So I don't know, this idea that I saw where one screenwriter said that Michael he believes that Michael like fixates on a person almost like sexually, and then kills them and then moves on to somebody else, that he feels like that explanation makes a lot more sense in some ways than the idea that there's this family connection or that he's on this kind of supernatural mission or whatever. But yeah, this idea that there's more to it than just a serial killer. I mean, obviously he's a guy who can take a few bullets, but you know, he's still a roughly human person. I think after this movie is when it starts to become like full-on Terminator intensity when he's coming for you. And, you know, the Terminator is like a comparison that I was thinking of more watching these movies than I had in the past. It's just that freight train. It's a person that's coming for you, you know? And if you sit still long enough, they're going to find you and they're going to get you. But as long as you run and hide, you might survive. But as far as adding mythos to him, even in these movies, they're adding more story around Michael without ever really going back and changing, well, up till part 6, but they haven't yet gone back and said anything different about Michael's origin. It still kind of seems like in part 4 and 5, he's a kid who killed his parents, you know, and that's what got the story started. But in part 5, I don't know, they make so many choices in part 5, like, you know, like right from the beginning, the idea that Michael crawls out the back of the mine into the river and kind of floats downstream and then is found by this hermit who takes him in and then feeds and cleans Michael or something. I don't know what, for a year, Michael's laying in this guy's little hut. I didn't understand, like, and he doesn't take the mask off of him. He's still, that felt so sloppy and weird. And then Michael wakes up and instantly kills the guy, you know, and like no appreciation for, I mean, I guess that's a Michael Myers thing to do, but it's funny that there was no like, this guy's tended to me as I was in a coma for a year, or is he like technically dead and he comes back? Originally, it was a different guy that found him, like an occult guy who actually does a spell to bring Michael back and puts the tattoo on him.
Oh.
And then one of the producers said, I don't think people are going to sympathize with this character dying. He's too weird. We need to make him a likable old hermit so that people will feel bad for him. But now the question of how he got the tattoo is not explained.
Right.
And the idea of just laying there dead for a year is gone, because before it was clearly an occult ceremony where he's being brought back. In this case, it kind of seems like he sleeps for a year. You just have to picture. I mean, again, I don't know what's happening in his drawers. I don't know how he's still alive unless the guy's force feeding him food. But there's no reason to think that Michael doesn't smell like shit. So it's possible he's just got loaded, crusty drawers, and they just don't ever get into that. They don't talk about that.
They don't talk about the fact that he smells like shit. And that is weird because he takes the place of people very often. There's like a very much like aha thing. Also, can we talk about how polite he is sometimes? Sometimes he'll just give people towels. Sometimes he'll just like help
we'll
people
get to the
with
towel. I think part 5 has the best example of that, because he actually stops so that Tina can buy cigarettes when she thinks he's her boyfriend. It's one of my favorite bits in all the movies. The way that it's, I like the idea that if a person with enough forceful personality gets around Michael, that he might just do what they say for a minute. I don't know. It's like, or kind of see how this plays out. Oh, she's going to a party. There might be more people to kill at the party. We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. I guess this is a good time to talk about Tina. She's kind of the innovation of this movie in a way, because you think Rachel might be our sort of main girl, and then she dies early, and then Tina kind of falls into place as the kind of like final girl-ish character. She's annoying, but she's nice to dogs and kids, and I think that goes a long way for me with the character. And also, I think she has like a heroic death that kind of redeems her. And I think this is my maybe 4th or 5th time to watch this movie, and I've crossed over from not liking Tina to kind of liking Tina and thinking she's actually kind of a breath of fresh air. She's not given the best material maybe in terms of dialogue, but I think she does a lot to make that character interesting and kind of fun. And yes, maybe she's annoying, but some people are annoying. I feel like it's a very, in some ways, a believable person. You know, I don't know. What do you guys think of Tina? How did you, was she nails on a chalkboard for you, Ronald, or did you find yourself being charmed by her?
sometimes when you're in art spaces, you tend to meet people with like these like electric personalities. They're kind of like on some sort of magical path that they move to the beat of their own drum. And there's something really cool about that. Like that's something that would have annoyed me as a kid that I for sure have an appreciation for as an adult. I'm just like, they're just trying to get by. They're just having fun, trying to make things exciting for themselves in this life. And I enjoyed her. I don't understand. Again, I don't understand how this close proximity to Mike Myers and people don't go like, man, he smells like. There's just an outside smell that people have. I mean, even if somebody smells incredible, just being outside for a long time, you smell like outside. You know what I'm saying? Like you smell like the sense of outside. Like you have an outside sweat versus an air conditioned sweat. Like nobody notices this.
Right.
Nobody's like, man, he smells like blood.
Or just like before they see him in the house, you'd think they'd be walking around going, yeah. Honey, did one of the dogs shit all over one of the rugs? But no, it's true. It's very true that it never gets talked about. Like, it's like, it seems like all you need is Loomis just once to say like, the stench of 1,000 assholes.
With a fan in front of it.
But I do think that in this one you're getting a little bit of a there's a couple of moments in this one and in the next one where I was actually impressed at how well they shot some parts for creepiness, in that Michael lurking in the background, being in the shadow, you see him and then you don't see him. It's like moments where a character is being scared that way feels sort of cheap, but when it's you, the viewer, finding him in the background and then in the next shot and then they cut back to it and he's not there, that to me reminds me of, remember Haunting of Hill House, how fun it was trying to spot all the ghosts?
All the ghosts, yeah.
And it creeped you out so much when you found one, as though you actually seen one. I kind of feel like The Shape has that sort of power. I think that one of the strengths of these movies, and particularly part 5 and part 6, honestly, is when they go for that effect of darkness and his face kind of emerges out of the darkness.
Yeah, for sure.
They do a really good job with that. And there's a couple of times where it's like, you imagine, if you were in that room, you might not see that, or you might think you saw something but not be sure. I think they do a pretty good job. I mean, I know that's elemental to a slasher film, but this is where Michael Myers becomes this kind of otherworldly thing, because even if you don't connect all this supernatural shit to him, he's a guy with a white face. Yeah. Everything else about him is like a shadow. So it's like that white face, the blankness of it. I mean, we talked about this in our first volume of the Watch 'Em All, but like that's a huge part of the power of him, Ronald. You're saying you don't quite know how to explain like his story or what his motivation is. The blankness of Michael Myers is sort of the horror of him. And it's kind of why Loomis keeps talking about his eyes, the nothing there, I think is what he says to Meeker in this film, is that like, you haven't seen it, I like the way he plays the daughter card with Meeker. Man, that's pretty rough when he's like, have you forgotten your daughter?
He's like, hey, take it easy.
I know. I like Meeker. I thought he was a good, dad energy kind of character.
For sure.
But I don't know. Do you have any favorite sequences, Steve? Is there like a moment in this film, a scene that seems like particularly scary or particularly effective?
I think you mentioned the scene where he's like pretending to be Tina's boyfriend in the car when he picks her up. Like, I like that scene because, eventually there's the vibe that Jamie's getting off of him, when she realizes what's going on or that it's not him. But Tina kind of is just acting like, oh, that's just my asshole boyfriend. Yeah. Being weird or whatever. Like, and I think like, just like even where that starts, like that convenience shop or whatever, where the guy that, the actual boyfriend in the car, when Michael's like fucking with him and like messing his car up, the
way he scratches the car first.
That's like, you love that stuff, man. It's just that's like fucking with him. He
doesn't always do that. So he thought this guy was a particularly douchey guy. That's what I like about that.
So it's so fun. And honestly, like, that scene always stood out, but it's a bummer of a scene. But Rachel's death scene, I thought always stood out to me because again. It's that thing of like, you get through 4 and you're like, oh, I love Rachel. I love Jamie. These are cool new characters. But then you get to the sequel to that movie and you're like, they do that thing where like a beloved character dies like early early on in the film, and you're just like, that hurts, you know. It's like,
Yeah.
who's gonna take Rachel's place? And I do really like Tina as a character. I think I think Tina works in this movie a lot, especially, you know, like you said, she gets a really good kind of sad death scene. But like that, like Ronald was getting at, like she's kind of just like a marches to her own beat, you know. It's just like doesn't give a shit about what anybody thinks about her, like, but underneath it all, she like is, you know, still a caring, empathetic, you know, decent person, even though she kind of puts it off otherwise.
I think when an actor can inject a little life into a film like this, it's like, I don't know, I'd rather that than somebody who's bland, like a pretty person who's bland. Totally. This is fun to see a person who has their own kind of thing. And the main reason I even framed it that way is because I remember not liking her the first time I saw the movie, and then like every time I've seen it, I've liked her more. I've been like, oh, she, why, you know, I don't know, but maybe it was just right at that age when maybe I went to a performing arts school, so maybe I was full up on free spirits. And it took me a while to be.
You had your fill,
Now I think more kindly of those folks. I teach at a performing arts school, so now I'm a bit more, you know, kindly towards that. But no, I just think that this movie still, it's like there's still an attempt to create those characters. So it's like, even if it's not quite clicking, I think like there's a scene between Sammy, the blonde girl, and Tina, where it's an attempt to have that kind of Linda, Annie, Laurie interplay of the first movie, and it's nowhere near as tolerable. It's kind of cringy, but at least it's real character. And even though these films are going to focus on teenagers, at least the two that we're watching had a lot of teenagers, these films also, the Halloween films are a bit more ensemble-y across the ages. There's, you know, you have a bit more time given to like the cops and the parents and that. And so I think that like there is something, that's another thing that maybe sets these movies apart just a little bit, is that they're trying to give you a cross-section of a town. You know, even if they don't, again, it maybe not be the most sophisticated version of that, but it is kind of interesting to get this sense that Haddonfield is part of the story. And you know, each movie has its own way of approaching, like, how is Haddonfield handling the fact that it's Haddonfield? You know, are they going ahead with Halloween? Are they banning Halloween? Do people talk about Michael Myers? Do they talk about it like it was no big deal? Those are all things that the series can play with, and there's not really a lot of logical sense to the way one story follows the next. But I do think, again, that's a feature of a Halloween film that I was noticing watching these, is that like, oh yeah, the way that the town is reacting to the last movie is kind of part of the story. But I would say a favorite scene of mine, outside of the one you mentioned, Steve, which really is one of my, it's like that's such a memorable scene, but her force of personality kind of forcing Michael to like do what she wants. He's just like, okay, we'll get fucking cigarettes, but he's not saying that. But also like, he doesn't even maybe know he's fully pretending to be her boyfriend as much as he is. Like, he almost expects her to be creeped out sooner. He's not used to somebody like just talking to him. And I think the fact that her boyfriend's name was Michael, which is convenient, but it plays into that scene a lot by having her say, come on, Mike, you know, and like, I just don't know that anyone's ever taken charge of Michael Myers the way that she does. But one of my favorite scenes, if I had to pick another one, I would say I thought the garbage chute scene was really creepy and suspenseful, because the question of like which way you go, and then the cleverness of, okay, now that he's fully invested in getting me down here at the bottom of the chute, the way Jamie escapes out of the top, it's such a relief that she can finally make it up there. But I don't know, that was just a really effective use of that thing. And I think they did a good job of setting it up in another scene that I liked, which is when Loomis comes into the house and he just starts talking in this weird, tender way to Michael. Michael's not there, but Loomis is talking to Michael as though, you're hiding and you're not going to come out, but I want you to hear me. And he's kind of poking around the house. But they give you the geography of that garbage chute in that scene, because he looks in the top, and then at the bottom, a dead cat, which is a funny way to do a cat jumping scare in a film, is to have a dead cat fall into the garbage chute. Even Loomis laughs when he realized that's what scared him. But I just think that's an interesting, you know, clever way to go about doing that. You set it up, you show us the garbage chute so we remember it, and then when she gets in that chute, we know where it goes. We've seen the basement, you know, we get that. I did think it was the man in black showing up in that scene that kind of bums me out, because otherwise I like the creepiness of Loomis just walking around an empty house talking to Michael Myers like he's there. That's just fun and weird to me. But yeah, the man in black, let's talk a little bit about that now that we're kind of to that part of the recap. Ronald, what did you think of this when you were seeing it for the first time? Did you wonder why there was a like a Western bandit walking around Haddonfield in silver-toed boots with a funny hat? Like, did he fit? Did that feel like it fit the world of these movies to you? What did you make
Hell
of that?
no.
Did that throw you off or interest you in any way, or was it just like, what is this?
It didn't fit in, and I was like wondering what the hell was going on. But I kind of like the idea of just throwing something crazy in, so, you know, a crazy looking character in. But yeah, I was completely thrown off. I was like, what is this person? I thought they were like a 6-shooter or something. So like,
All you needed was like a spittoon sound effect.
yeah.
I did think the sound effects were off the chain in these movies. Did you notice the ricochet sound effects in Halloween 4 are like right off of the like Western gunfight sound effects disc? Yeah.
You mean at the end when they were shooting them?
Yeah, well, just there was tons of moments for that, like when the rednecks were opening up and killing poor Ted Hollister in the bush, but also just anytime a bunch of people were shooting guns, they throw in the ricochet sound that you've heard like in old movies and stuff.
Yeah, it was like the bigger guns were like gow gow gow, and everything's like, pshoo, and then there's like, pshoo, and then there's the handguns. So they're all kind of making these the ricochet sounds, the handgun sounds, and then the shotgun sounds. All kind of going once. He's like, ugh.
Yeah. What year did Saving Private Ryan come out, Steve? Because I feel like that was the year that everybody after that started to being more careful with like their gun sound effects. You know, they tried to record more stuff, and you heard more like shells falling and things like that. But yeah, it'd be funny to track.
Yeah.
You could probably track the ricochet sound effects. Like you could probably figure out which one it is and which movies it's used in, and do a supercut. But no, I think that yeah, I mean, obviously this is schlocky, and I mean this is the moment where Loomis running around in a trench coat and busting in, like you're talking about, Ronald. The moment when it starts to seem really silly is when he's like in a room full of regular doctors, and he's there dressed like a private investigator or something. It's just a strange little thing. But it's like there is something about Loomis in this film. This is the most unhinged we ever see him. When he's like holding Jamie up in front of him, in front of the shape, saying like, "Here she is, come get her." Like, I know what he's trying to do, but it's still like the darkest he gets that we've seen is like so pointedly using her as bait. That's kind of the thing he does all along. But this is like really crazy. And I don't know, like I think that's maybe a danger with a character like that is you do have to kind of keep making him, like you said, if he shows up, he's kind of deranged from the word go in these movies. Yeah. It's a little bit of a switch from the mannered guy in the first film who sort of felt so, listen to me, you must believe me, you know. Now he's just showing up.
He's sick and tired.
Screaming. Yeah, no, he's right. He's tired of people not
sick and tired, man. Yeah.
Look, you think he shows up in the years where nothing happens though and acts the same way, and that's why everyone is like tired of his shit.
Like, you know, he just goes to the bars and warns people.
Well, I mean, supposedly there's like 10 years between what is the time gap? I think I pulled up something.
It's like 6 or 7 years or something in between.
Well, the Halloween timeline. Yeah, let's look at this. First one takes place in 78, and the Michael Myers scene at the beginning is 1963. So that one spans 63 to 78. Halloween 2 is in 78. Halloween 3, 82, but not really. It doesn't matter. Halloween 4 is, technically 10 years later. So do you think he's been showing up every year, acting the same way, and they're like, nothing's going on, Loomis, go home, you know? But then this year, he's right. Then the next one's set in 89. These movies are set in the years that they're coming out. That's kind of interesting. And then they build in usually the number of years between the movies, you know, like as they explain, because like Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers is set in 95, I think, because they refer to it as 6 years later. So up to this point, the timeline is it makes sense in a strange kind of way. You know, Ronald, it's after part 6 though, that like these are the movies that made them do all that shit where whenever someone makes a Halloween sequel, they're like, this is picking up on part 1 or part 2. Nobody wants to deal with the lore, the tattered storyline that you get at the end of this run, you know. And even this one ends on an interesting kind of, I mean, again, it feels like an attempt to introduce something new and crazy, but it doesn't feel like a Halloween movie to me when he's sitting in the prison cell and the man in black frees him and, like, you know, kills all the cops and stuff. I just wonder why they let him wear his mask in the prison cell. That to me was the funniest thing about that last scene. But I don't know, that scene just doesn't register with me. Even though Jamie walking in, I think she's good at playing the emotion of like crying, like you're in this place that should be the place of safety, and it's so chaotic, and there's no telling what's happening. But I just feel like that ending it has more of a kind of quality to it. Whereas Jamie killing or attacking her adopted mother at the beginning of the previous movie is like, I don't know, like there's something to that. You can kind of chew on that. I feel like at the end of this movie, I was more like, oh, all right. What about you, Steve? The Man in Black. What do you think of that? Does that feel like just an attempt to add something that's just that never clicks, or you know?
Not a fan.
Yeah,
not a fan. Honestly, like that piece, and kind of where it goes through into the next film with like the cult, that whole thing, like
what the hell was that?
The connective tissue of that is just is very weak to me, both between the films and just the franchise as a whole. That stuff was always very weird. But yeah, not a fan.
Well, I guess this leaves us with Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. Before we move on, does anybody have anything else to say about 5? I only have one other little thing I wanted to note, which is just Max the dog. Steve, you got anything?
I was going to mention, I can't remember, was it 4 or 5 that there was the big, like, I remember like the marketing of it was like, there was like talk of Michael being a woman. Do you remember that? Oh. There's a sequence where like, it looks like a woman when he takes the mask off. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
He gets unmasked in 5, so
then it's definitely 5.
Well, he cries. That's something I can't believe we haven't talked about. We didn't talk about the tear when Jamie goes and that, by the way, that was confusing. The whole bit that you find out about that Michael has dug up the grave of a 9-year-old girl and left the body, and taken the coffin, and then later you see that he's got all of his like candles, like his massage therapy clinic with all the candles, and he's got the coffin in there. But it really took me a while. Like I had to go back and find that dialogue to understand. Oh, that's the coffin of the girl that Michael Myers dug up, I guess. But he just left the body there. But Jamie's lying in the coffin, and then he comes up to her, and does she touch him, or did they just? But basically, she asks him to take off his mask, and then she says, "I understand you." And he sheds a tear. And I read where the director was like, I wanted to show that Michael was experiencing emotion. And I'm just like, so that's a pretty 1-to-1 ratio. Like, oh, I want to show that he's experiencing emotion. How about a single tear falling out of his eye? It seems like that's the first thing you would think of, and then you would try to think of something else. You know what I mean? Like, surely there's some other way other than the tear, because it's just like such a strange thing to go from zero emotion to a single tear. But yeah, I don't know if I ever understood that decision, or even really what's going on between Jamie and Michael.
I couldn't remember. Like, I had a memory of like there being something with the marketing. It was either, it had to have been in 5, and I remember the scene itself, but like I couldn't really place it in the movie. So I was kind of curious if either, especially you, Johnny, from looking into this, if you had come across that anywhere.
No,
like, I feel like it was like in in the trailer or even of it. It was very weird. I'm like looking at it now as we're talking, but I can't find.
Well, I'll go ahead and mention the thing I think is kind of interesting about Max the dog. I thought it was a good use of kind of creep factor when she's looking out the window and Max the dog is barking at the house, but not at her. Like he's barking at something else, but looking at the house. That's a pretty creepy. I mean, that's just good visual storytelling of like your dog is barking at maybe an intruder, and they're looking at the house, and you're up there, and they're, I don't know. That was good. And also, Max the dog gets away. The fake out scare of that is, remember, she thought that like Michael Myers had let the dog out or whatever, but actually the dog went to go chase a cat. He comes running back up with a dead, bloody cat in his mouth, and nobody says anything like, oh my God, or anything. They're just like, well, dogs will be dogs. Huh? I guess it wasn't, false alarm, everybody. Sorry. It's that kind of fake out moment in the middle of Rachel's home invasion scene where it's like, no one thinks to say, oh, how gruesome. He's literally holding a bloody animal in his mouth when he comes running up. And they're just like, oh, Max, come on, get in here, you silly. But no, I thought that was, I kind of missed Rachel, but I do think that scene, it kind of reminds me of some of the way that Scream can usually get a good sequence of suspense out of just following a character who you know is going to get it, but you don't know the exact timing of it. And that delayed gratification, gratification's a weird word to use because I like Rachel, but knowing that she's probably about to get killed and seeing how long that scene goes on with her being freaked out and recognizing there's a threat and then thinking there's no threat and then going back to, you know what I mean? That kind of scene always makes you feel especially bad for a character because it's like she tried to do the right thing. She called the cops. And now if she called again, they wouldn't probably believe anything was going on because of the fact that she had, just called. So I don't know. There's an interesting bit of suspense in that scene. I don't really have that much else to mention. I did want to kind of clock. Did you notice that the on-screen title just says Halloween 5? There's no Revenge of Michael Myers.
No.
And the other thing is these movies have really kind of dropped the ball in terms of cool opening sequences involving a pumpkin. The first 3 really held to that. The fourth one really did not, like just had credits interspersed with rural images. Creepy, but not really that memorable. And then the fifth one has a really kind of sloppy version of a cool idea, which is like we are inside a pumpkin that's being carved and it's intercut with the credits. But it didn't really visually work that well. I don't know if you guys had any thoughts about those opening sequences, Ronald. Do you wish they had stuck with some kind of interesting version of a pumpkin, or do you think it's fine for them to say, we're out of ideas and we just want to throw some text on screen and get this movie going?
I kind of wish they would have tried something crazy. I mean, because the skull inside of it doesn't get any better than that one. Like that intro was. I mean, the movie wasn't quite great, but the intro, you know what I mean? Like it just really stood out to me. It was like, oh, this is.
Talk about Halloween 2's intro, yeah.
Yeah, Hollywood
2.
Halloween. There's something about.
Oh my God! There's your sequel idea.
Halloween.
Halloween or Hollywood, and then colon. Michael Myers goes big time or something like that. I don't know.
There's something about all of that stuff, like all those beginnings that kind of set the tone. But yeah, just showing text. At least do it in a cool way. Like, if he kills somebody and a splat happens, then the blood comes down and goes out. Something. They didn't really go for that after a while. I was just like, here's the movie.
Well, I mean, it's like, there's a little bit of that. And I think the way that they edited it, and they don't really explain the tattoo, but clearly the tattoo is meant to be something new that we're going to clock, and all that stuff is kind of just... it's just messy, it's just not, it just doesn't make that much sense. So that when you get to the fact that there's now a 6-year gap between Halloween 5 and Halloween 6, that's another period like the period between Halloween 3 and Halloween 4 where they don't really know what to do with the franchise. There was talk of whether they needed to even follow up on the end of Halloween 5, which is crazy with that kind of ending. But there was just like, what are we going to do with this? And there were different approaches, but one of the things that they obviously had to kind of contend with was that Michael Myers seemed to be sprung by somebody at the end of this movie, and Jamie's still alive. But they just had so many different ways of approaching that issue. This is that period. I don't know if you ever heard that Quentin Tarantino was once asked to write a Halloween script.
Oh no!
He said he never could crack it, but that he got as far as thinking his idea would be like a road movie, like the Man in Black and Michael Myers on the road, stopping, and like everywhere they go, Michael kills everybody, and then they get in the car and drive off to another place. But he said he didn't really have a firm idea. And then I think there were other. Let me see if do I have any kind of indication of that? It's at some point it might be fun to just. This is when John Carpenter thought, well, if in the real world, what would we do with someone that we couldn't kill? We would shoot them into space. So that's the one, where John Carpenter actually wanted to do Michael Myers in space. I don't know if he means shooting him into space or having like an outer space prison that he would be kept in. I could see the space prison almost being an idea, but a completely crazy one. But that's just showing, John Carpenter has a kind of burn it all down sensibility about this franchise. He's not really that, especially at the point that was in the late 80s, early 90s, he was not trying to go back to the basics or anything like that.
Sure.
But so when they finally came up with this script, like the actual screenwriter was almost like given this impossible thing of like, don't feel like you have to follow up the last movie. We don't want the continuity to get too crazy, but obviously you still have to explain certain things like where Michael's been, what's going on with him. Ultimately, I think some of the answers they come up with for Halloween 6 is, I just think it's crazy. I mean, honestly, there's some stuff in this movie that is just really bad creative choices, in my opinion, as far as, what they do with Jamie and her plight and kind of how they play that. But I don't know, Ronald, what did you feel like when you were sitting down to watch Halloween 6 and you saw, I don't know, which version did you watch? This is, I guess, where we can talk a little bit about, did you watch the producer's edit or did you watch the theatrical edit?
The theatrical for sure. Okay. Tonally, this one was, I don't know, man, it wasn't my jam. Like, I don't know. It's just like, it just felt like a bunch of ideas that just, the cult thing just really threw me off. I'm like, what the fuck is all of this? And like the idea that they're kind of implying that like there's an evil cabal that's kind of waving their hands and going, "You kill everybody, Michael." It's like, it's a little strange to me.
That's like manipulating this story that doesn't seem like it has a manipulative hand behind it. Like if you try to track what's been going on in these movies, right. The timing of it, what Michael Myers has done, doesn't fit in with this idea that he's being controlled by this cult, or he's a servant of this cult, or that he's powered by this cult. But yeah,
and they really didn't even try to like pick those. They didn't even try to take things from the past movies and say, "Hey, do you remember when this happened or this happened? We were in the shadows." Or, there was none of that. It was just like, we've been there all along. It's so strange. Didn't like it.
That's always a risk when you do that. We've been there all along in part 6 of a franchise. Steve, what did just your kind of first takes on this film, and which version did you watch?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen both. But I guess we can talk about the theatrical since that's what Ronald saw too.
Yeah.
I don't know, like this. Yeah, this is the one that's like a huge mess, and I think right off the jump, what I dislike about it, which is a different piece in the producer's cut, but I just feel like what they do with Jamie so early, like that Jamie is that character that Rachel was in 5, like just to do that, like it seems consistent. I get it, but there isn't enough of a handoff in this, like to take over, what is supposed to be like this final one of the trilogy. I think that is all just like done very poorly. To not have Danielle Harris in it, age wise, I think she would. I don't know if she'd have been old enough to have. What was it? 6 years later, 7 years later?
I think it ended up being a scheduling problem that she was not able to do this film. But looking at the material, I could imagine that it wouldn't be the thing that would bring you back if there was any question of doing it, and then you find out, okay, you've been held prisoner by a cult and raped, either by some unnamed person in the theatrical cut. The father of the child is never named and never solved. In the producer's cut, it's made very explicit that it's Michael's kid. However, the screenwriter intended it to be Dr. Wynn, who turns out to be the Man in Black, has no juice whatsoever in the theatrical edit and has a drop or two of juice in the producer's edit. Let's talk a little bit about what that is, because I just think it's worth mentioning to people that are listening. This movie picks up with Paul Rudd, who plays Tommy Doyle, one of the 2 kids that Laurie was babysitting in the first movie. So it's like that's an attempt to kind of update that character. And I think, honestly, this is when the Weinsteins got involved in the films, because this is put out through Dimension Films. Yeah. This is when they started, I think they were trying to go for like a teenage boy audience. Like, I think behind the scenes, they were trying to gear this towards having a male protagonist. I don't know how cynically they were trying to do it, but I think just for a change, it's kind of fun to have Tommy Doyle be the main character. But I think that like they were really dead set on that like this movie might appeal more to an audience they were trying to appeal to if it had a male protagonist. And I think that's kind of corny. But Tommy Doyle's a fun character to pick back up. He was the character that Anthony Michael Hall played in the recent trilogy. So it's like different filmmakers have had a different idea of who he might be. I just think it's funny that this is Paul Rudd, frankly. The producer's edit has his name as Paul Stephen Rudd. I just love that. It's like he's so new that it's like he's not even Paul Rudd yet. Then by the time they did the theatrical, I think his name is on screen as just Paul Rudd. But in both cases, it says introducing and starring, I think, which is a fun, weird thing to have before someone's name. But anyway, like the idea of following Tommy Doyle, who's now obsessed with Michael Myers and is trying to stop him, and then like, you know, to him when he meets Loomis is kind of like a rock star. There's some kind of fun to be had there. It's fun seeing young Paul Rudd, not quite Paul Rudd yet. Like he hasn't quite figured out that he's funny when he's like his best to take in a world like this is to be the guy who's a little bit funny, you know. But it's fun to see Paul Rudd kind of, he's doing this sort of voice that's very like, oh, do you not understand? I'm very serious and intellectual and a little bit creepy. It's just funny. It's like he's not ironic Paul Rudd yet, and it's his first movie. So, and if you hear him talk about it, he's very kind of generous and kind about it. He said it took him a while to come to terms with the fact that it wasn't considered to be a good movie, and he thought he might be seen as a joke. But now he's really happy that his first movie was a Halloween movie. And he said he has memories of standing at craft services with Michael Myers. You know, and like to him, that's a fun movie memory. But you don't really get a lot of Paul Rudd out of this performance. It's just kind of like, what if he was just in a movie because he's a cute boy? That's kind of how this role plays. But it does have also Donald Pleasance's last performance ever, but also definitely last as Loomis. And then also brings in this arm of the Strode family. It's such a crazy thing that these are the Strodes to me. I don't even know why they needed to be the Strodes, but it's like Laurie's uncle and Aunt John and Deborah, who are named after John Carpenter and Deborah Sure, which is kind of interesting, which is really interesting given that John Strode is a complete rageaholic asshole. But like, it's just a weird little family dynamic to get to know early in this film. Ronald, what did you think when you were kind of thrown in with these characters? Did it feel like that horror sequel thing of like, we're getting a little bit of a weak sauce version of characters that we've had before, or did it feel like something new?
It felt like something new and trash. Too much, too late. And it just
something new that you found in the trash.
Yeah, I was just like, and I love Paul Rudd, man, but it was just like, all this is too much. They really tried to create this whole world of shit that was done so far into the franchise. Like, it just didn't work for me on any level.
Yeah. But it's an attempt to try to make sense out of this shit that they've done in the last couple movies. But I mean, yeah, the biggest mistake is not realizing that Jamie Lloyd could be your hero of this film, and a character that we love the performance enough of Danielle Harris that we would have enjoyed seeing her. I mean, they should have worked that out. But if they couldn't work it out, they could at least give Jamie the kind of, I hate to say respect when we're talking about a fictional character in a slasher series. But, you know, it's sort of a cliche to bring back the character from the last movie and kill them. I see how that builds up the hero, which is the slasher in this case. Michael Myers is the hero of these films, right? In some way. I just think with Jamie, she had such a sad, bleak life that it's like, it's too much. Because if you play out her life story, it's just gruesome. It's like from being a kid, going through this situation, witnessing the people she cared about murdered, then being abducted by a cult and held prisoner, and then being raped by somebody. But also the creative decision to say, oh, we're going to decide that Michael Myers is a rapist of children. I'm sorry. I know this sounds weird about all the things Michael Myers has done, but you don't need to make him that bad. Like, I'll take a guy who'll like kill you with a corkscrew in your temple or something. I'll take that all week, all month, all year even, guys, over a guy who's I mean, I just don't want the grim gruesomeness of real life stuff like that creeping in that makes me think like, well, now Michael Myers isn't like there's no fun in this movie. I think that's the kind of short version of what I'm trying to say. It's like there's so little light in this movie. And it doesn't seem like, it's like so many films that have rape and things like that in them. They don't feel like they're actually dealing with it. It's like this glib throwing it in because it's edgy, not really dealing with the idea of a story. Not that I want to see that story particularly either in my slasher film, but like, it's just the fun is gone. And yeah, seeing how they treat Jamie, I don't know, kind of shows me that they didn't quite know what they had. I do think there's some fun Loomis stuff in this. I like seeing him he's got a full beard. They let him finally change his outfit. I love him retired, sitting there tapping away on his typewriter, talking to the radio. Yeah. All that stuff's kind of fun, but yeah, it's not enough. It's not enough to get this movie off the ground. And then you get into the idea that, Ronald, the movie you saw, the theatrical version, is all but incoherent. Like that last part where they get into the lab and they shoot him up with some green stuff, and then Paul Rudd beats him with a pipe until green goo comes out of him, and then they leave.
The green stuff.
And then Loomis says, "I've got something to take care of." And then it cuts to the mask laying on the ground, and you hear a scream or a laugh or something. Like, I didn't even know what that noise was supposed to be, but that is the laziest, weirdest hodgepodge ending. It literally makes no sense. Yeah. The ending from the other one, Ronald, though, it doesn't make a whole lot more sense, but at least it pays off. You know how Tommy has those runes?
Yeah.
It gives us that speech about the runes in the middle of the movie. Well, in this one, he actually stops Michael by laying some runes down in a line, and then he cuts his hand and bleeds and like wipes some blood on the ground, and then Michael comes up and grabs him by the throat, and as he's holding him up, Tommy says, "Sam Hain," and then Michael freezes in his tracks and can't move beyond the line of runes and blood on the floor, and then Tommy manages to escape. Oh, and then this is even crazier. Then does the Man in Black show up at that point? And then when Loomis says, "I've got something to take care of," he goes back in, and Michael's laying on the ground. Oh, yeah, the Man in Black comes up when Michael's stopped by the runes. The Man in Black walks up and is like, "What have they done to you, my boy?"
Yeah.
And then it cuts to outside, and they're like, "We're going to get out of here. You should come with us." And Loomis says, "No, I've got something to take care of." And he goes back inside, and Michael's laying on the ground. And then Loomis takes the mask off and sees that it's not Michael, it's the Man in Black. It's the Dr. Wynn, who then explains to Loomis that you're now Michael's keeper, like I was. I mean, you know how throughout the movie he was saying, "I want you to take my job." Maybe that was stronger in the producers edit, but definitely in the theatrical, he's saying, "I want you to take over for me when I retire," which is really weird for a guy who looks like he's about 60 to say to a guy who looks like he's about 80 to say, "I'm retiring, you take over." But at the end, we see that what he means is, you're now Michael's keeper, and you're like working for the cult, and I'm out of here. And then Loomis looks down, and the thorn tattoo appears on his arm, and Loomis goes, "Nah!" And then it cuts to Michael walking away dressed as the Man in Black.
What? That's
the version that the Weinstein said, "Let's take this away and edit this." And what they put out, the theatrical version you saw, was like 10 minutes shorter. The last act is completely different. Like the last 20 minutes are completely different. Up to that part, the producer's edit, the original edit, just had a little bit more. So it's actually kind of better up to the point where it's suddenly weirder. But like, it's at least, it makes a little more sense. Like, for instance, the reveal that Dr. Wynn is the Man in Black makes a little more sense when we've been spending more time with him throughout the movie, and he keeps having these moments where he says something a little weird and you catch a look. It makes a little bit more sense. It's still insanely incoherent, but at least they were trying to set something up. But that last act is just nuts. And that last moment that I just described to you, I mean, I can't even believe what I saw. It's so bizarre. And to think that that's Donald Pleasance's like last moment on screen, either version, it's like not the memory of Loomis you want to have, even though I love his sweater and his jacket in this one. But yeah, Ronald, I don't know. You kind of dodged a bullet not watching that other one, but I will say that it made more sense. So it is like the Weinsteins took it away and changed it, and they added some gore. You know, the guy's head exploding when he gets electrocuted, that was added. All the really extreme gore was added. And then they changed the last act. But yeah, they didn't know what they were doing with this. The original ending was supposed to be that Tommy and Kara and Danny and the baby escaped to the same bus station where Jamie left the baby earlier, and they're like washing up, and then Tommy comes and finds that Kara is dead, and Danny has killed her, and he's standing above her, and the baby's gone. That's at least something, but it still just sets up another movie that they probably would have not gotten around to paying off. And there was some talk of how that would lead into the next movie with Tommy being accused of the murders and going on the run. Another road movie idea. But again, it just feels like they didn't know what they were doing. And these twist endings, as much as I love the ending of 4, I think it made them feel like, oh, we should just have a crazy ending.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't work. I mean, neither of those cases. Well, part 5 doesn't have a good ending. And then neither version of part 6 has a good ending. So I feel like it becomes a real issue, and it makes sense that the next movie they make is like a throwback, trying to say we want you to remember the first Halloween. None of this Cult of Thorn stuff. But so Ronald, did you know about Cult of Thorn? Was this your first exposure to
This
all
is
of
my
that?
first exposure. So, the robes, the whatever room they were in, I was like, what is all of this? What is all of this? And, this is an interesting franchise. Like, it's gone in all these directions. It had child killers. It just is really interesting. But this one really made me realize that it's really lost its way. This one was the most incoherent of them. Um, and this is, including Season of the Witch. This is the most incoherent movie I've seen of the franchise. I mean, unless there's something that gets worse. I mean, I haven't seen anything after 6 besides the. Yeah. I think I did see a Halloween H2O though.
I feel like a lot of people saw that one.
Yeah.
That's the one I was referring to earlier. It's the one that I love that one.
I need to, yeah. So I'm excited about rewatching that when we get to that in a couple weeks.
Yeah, no, I think the next batch is an interesting one because that's the Halloween H2O, and then it's Resurrection where you can see Busta Rhymes do karate on Michael Myers.
Yeah.
And then it's Rob Zombie's 2 movies. So you can see that what I just said kind of holds true. All those are sort of attempts to restart something, to follow up on something and restart something. And then with the Rob Zombie thing, it's like maybe, the well seems like it's really run dry after Resurrection and they have to do something different. But yeah, I think this is the part where the question about franchises is kind of coming to me. And I just was wondering, like, what are your guys' thoughts on franchises in general? I mean, I think we talk a lot about, fun movie series on this show. So I think we're kind of pro franchise in a sense. And when a trailer for a new movie that's a sequel to something that looks kind of fun, I mean, I think we get all excited about that stuff. But also I have this weird little voice in the back of my mind that says, like, why so many sequels? Like, what is it about this urge to, like, try to repeat? I mean, obviously if you say to make money, that's the obvious answer, but like, just, what do you think you wish for? Would you rather at this point, Ronald, that Halloween was a one and done classic? Or do you think that somehow the first one has gained a reputation because, I mean, similar to like James Bond or anything where they keep, doing iterations? Like, do you think the iterations, even if they're bad, they kind of strengthen the idea that this is an evergreen thing? Or do you think at a certain point it's just trying to get blood from a stone and there's nothing more there?
I don't think that anybody should ever do this ever again. This whole, like, making one, stopping and starting. But I think what's really cool is these are like cultural mile markers. It's like a real idea of culture at the time, style of horror, because it really does shift, from the first one to the 6th. I mean, that's the cool part about it. Like, throughout the whole thing, I'm still in this place where I'm like, these are mile markers. These are time stamps of what's going on at the time. So, like I said, I hope this never happens again. But I'm really happy that it did happen with this particular franchise. I don't ever want to see anything go to this many movies ever again. Ever again. But it is really cool. It is really cool to be like, what was happening in '88? Okay, cool. These drinks were this, this style existed. I think that's so cool. And then there's just the kills. Like, even if you don't like the movies, the kills are nuts. Every movie, there's at least one that makes you go, oh, what was that? Whether it's a rake to the face or,
Yeah, there's a moment of horror that you can relate to, maybe even. I thought Deborah, the mom, her death scene in this one was like a good use of that same kind of suspense I was talking about with Rachel, where it's just you're tracking her around the house and you're waiting for her to realize that she's in real danger. And that stuff almost always, if it, up to a point, that stuff almost always works for me. I did think it was kind of interesting what a shitheel John Strode is in this.
Yes.
Like, from the moment he's on screen, the guy's the worst human being. And it's like, I just made a note of, like, you got to have someone worse than Michael Myers in your Michael Myers movie so that Like the Barry Sims, the shock jock DJ is kind of that same thing of like someone it's kind of fun. Yeah, maybe even Michael, the boyfriend with the car, who's an asshole about that. By the way, is there a more 80s line than a guy saying to a guy, touch the car again and you're dead? That I feel like that was in like half the movies that came out in the 80s. But no, I don't know. I just think that like that sort of thing of here's a guy who we hate from the moment he's on screen. Then he has this one weird moment of introspection when he comes into the house and he's looking for his wife and she doesn't come to him. He says, well, she actually left. It's a weird moment of introspection for this complete monster guy. It's like as though he knew he was going to run his wife off at some point, and he's, she actually left me. And then I think he says like, God damn it. It's like, but it is kind of a weird little thing of like, why did that guy have to be so terrible? Like he actually hits Kara in the face when she challenges him. And he's like saying the youth are what's wrong with the world. So yeah, we're supposed to really enjoy watching him get electrocuted. And he's in a state of exploding shortly after that. So it is very funny that. Do you think that'll really happen to a head, Ronald, if you electrocuted somebody on a power break?
So, but I'd like to find out.
That's when
you find out that I'm.
Then it turns out you're behind me, and you swing me around and throw me on a fuse box. So were there any particular, I mean, obviously none of us were big fans of Halloween 6. Before we wrap this up, were there any moments or scenes or anything that you liked that kind of stuck with you? Not really.
Not really.
Nah, this is a very unmemorable one for me. I mean,
Yeah.
The thing I remember is obviously the different cuts and Paul Rudd being in it and being unhappy with the handling of Jamie's character. That's like the memory I have of this movie, even before going in to rewatch it. So it's like, really isn't a lot of stuff that stands out. Like, I guess like the only thing I could say nicely is that like, I think it's just the feeling in general. Anytime you see Haddonfield at Halloween, like I love that vibe. And I think all the movies, like the ones that we've talked about today, especially because they've kind of kept with in some way, like this storyline. Is that like it's the iconic thing of like the fall Halloween, like that's what a town looks like even the Paul Rudd pieces, like where you see him at the festival or the town square thing, it's just like there's this vibe that Haddonfield has at this time of year in the fall. It's like I wish I had that. That's what it's really what it comes down to, is like I wish that my town was like that, or that I the closest I get is like when we used to record at John's house. Like walking down his street, it kind of felt like Haddonfield. Like I love that vibe. That's all. And I feel like this movie, at least, that's still there in some way, shape or form. But that's probably the only really positive thing I can say about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a time capsule. I love. Oh, there he is in my background image, Loomis with this nice sweater and scarf and coat. I love Loomis in this. I think he looks cool. I do think the series loses a little something with no Loomis. And at this point in the timeline, Laurie's dead. And by the time the next movie rolls around, they're not really interested in picking up the story with Tommy. So I read somewhere where they said that at this point, the franchise, all they had left was the monster. And, that's enough. Michael Myers just in a new house with new people, that's enough of something. But I love the idea that the real answer to that question was, no, off behind the scenes, Jamie Lee Curtis is like quietly planning a return to this franchise because she wants the 20th anniversary to be special. So I think that's kind of where we'll be going into in Volume 3. But I also just want to end with this note because I think this is really interesting. You mentioned it earlier, and I mentioned it in terms of good sort of stalking scenes. Next year is when Scream comes out. I mean, from this movie. This is 95. Scream is 96. This is kind of the last gasp. Arnold, you were saying never again, but this was one of the last big slasher franchise attempts before people started to say, oh, we know the deal with slashers. And then you end up with the wave of anybody that comes after this for a while has to like deal with Scream. You know what I mean? Yeah. But Scream in some ways is a response to the kind of blow. I mean, Scream is a love letter to Halloween, the first one, but the I don't know, it's just as interesting to me that right as this series was kind of trickling off with, honestly, I think this is I think this remains the lowest grossing Halloween film. Let me look real quickly at the grosses. I think I have. Okay, The Curse of Michael Myers.
Was it not?
No,
The
it
Revenge?
made it's the lowest grossing Halloween film is Halloween 5: The Revenge of Michael
Revenge,
Myers.
yes.
The Curse of Michael Myers is just above that. So I mean, it's like it made back its budget enough to say would make another one, but not so much of a hit or a movie that anyone particularly liked. So it took them another what is that, 3 years before the next movie, and it wasn't anything to do with what this movie was doing. It was much more piggybacking on that Scream era, and it's the Weinstein Company, and so they can bring in certain stars and have certain things happen. So the next movie feels like a much less B-movie-ish approach, I guess. This is kind of like the very end of Donald Pleasance being the name above the title, you know? Not just because he's dead, but also just the stature of the character in the film. So yeah, it's an interesting little time capsule, but I have to say I'm with you, Steve. There's not really much about this one. Like I'm with you too, Ronald, but Steve, as someone who's seen it before and, you know, had time to like have it grow on you if it's going to, there's not that like Tina or something from part 5 that grows on me when I watch this movie. It actually is a little bit of a slog to get through 2 versions of this movie in a short period of time. I'm glad I watched the producer's edit though, because it does give me a real perspective on what the theatrical edit, what they were trying to fix about the producer's edit, but then also what they lost by just trimming out a few lines here or there that made the movie more abstract but less sensible. But yeah, that's it. That was it.
That's it, guys.
So Ronald, we've talked about Nightmare on Elm Street before. We've talked about this. Where are you with these franchises at this point? We've never really gone much into the Friday the 13th movies, but if you were to compare Friday the 13th, Halloween to Nightmare on Elm Street, which franchise, 6 movies in, I think 6 movies into Nightmare was Freddy's Dead, right, Steve?
Yeah. 6.
And that was kind of the end of that was a capper on a kind of phase of the series too. So yeah, the first 6 movies, first Nightmare movies and the first Halloween movies. Which ones have your heart more?
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
By a landslide.
By a landslide, okay.
By a goddamn landslide.
Yeah,
man.
Goddamn landslide. God damn it. Yeah, I mean, it's also like just, I mean, it's momentum too, you know? I feel like I think Nightmare probably maintained it a little better, even if they had varying degrees of success, in the film itself or in box office or whatever. But I think Halloween really did kind of, it has like this inclination, at least to the point that we're at now, to kind of like go kind of crazy in the third of the 2, triplets of films here that we've talked about thus far. Like even, with Curse going so heavily into the Cult of Thorn or whatever it was called, that stuff just got so crazy, where I feel like with Nightmare, like there was always like layers to approaches or things you'd find out about Freddy in terms of like their means or their attempts to kill him, like backstory and things like that they would just layer on. But I don't know that it ever got like as insane or silly or just plain dumb as some of the stuff that the cult stuff really I just dislike greatly.
It's just such
the
a
Halloween
miscalculation.
Yeah, it's just it doesn't connect at all with like the soul of the first film, like really what the soul of this franchise is for me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, and it's weird to say that because these movies are, like they only have to be a certain kind of fun, like we were saying, kind of disposable, kind of chilling fun. But like, I think maybe they're like, as much as I admire them trying to do something cinematic or real, I feel like that creates this situation where they maybe load too much into these movies. And like the fact that the 6th movie, honestly, if you just sat down and watched it, I don't know that you would even grasp what you were supposed to be thinking about these characters. They don't really explain who Jamie is or why you should care.
Absolutely.
Even Loomis feels like a different kind of character, the way he comes into the story. So yeah, I think that it's like Halloween 4, for instance, though, you could sit down and just watch that one, and all you'd need to know was, oh yeah, they caught him before, and now he's escaping again. You know what I mean? That's your setup. 5 and 6 have this increasing amount of like mythology on them, and I think that it's a miscalculation when so much of the beauty of what makes the first one a classic is the starkness of it. So
yeah, cool. So yeah, I guess to tease a little bit here, like you just kind of went through it, John, but we'll have a few more episodes coming up here of standard movie schmovie, movies, TV, everything else in between conversations, and then we'll do our final. Well, I guess no, not the final. Are we doing 4 volumes?
We talked about. I actually I've thought about after watching these movies and doing my research. I think we should do an episode about the David Gordon Green trilogy. I think that.
Okay. So then 2 more volumes.
Because I think watching them now after seeing all of these would be a different experience for me than the way it felt watching them as they came out. Because I haven't rewatched any of them really, so I'd be fine with one more rewatch. So we could do a 4th volume in what would that be?
Like September
or something.
Yeah.
Perfect thing to do. Finish up the Halloween series in September.
Right as fall kicks off. We got it, guys.
We timed it beautifully.
We did so well.
But next time is the loaded one. Next time is 2 more attempts at jump-starting Halloween, and then a remake and a sequel to a remake by Rob Zombie. So that'll be a jam-packed episode next month. But in the meantime, Ronald, you need to tell people what our next required viewing pick is, because we're back to, like Steve said, the usual movie schmovie episodes. And what he means is that usual bullshit that we do on this show.
Same old.
Required viewing.
Ripped right from the headlines. I wanted to choose something that is so now and so maybe a failure, maybe not. Kevin Costner left.
You're gonna say that
his successful show, man, because it is burning in my brain right now. Kevin Costner left an incredibly successful franchise, and he said, "You know what? Fuck this show. I'm going to take some of this momentum and I'm going to write and get money from some shady places,
questionable sources,
and make a trilogy of movies that no one knows anything about with little to no promotion. And I'm going to put it out. And I want to watch the first of it, Horizon, American Tale. Is it?
I think it's an American Tale. It's Fievel, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's a live action remake, but it's Kevin Costner as Fievel in a remake of Fievel Goes West. Yeah,
saga,
an American saga. Kevin Costner's Western that he would love. He would love if he goes to a Walmart in 6 months and sees it in a bin somewhere. He said this. See it sold in a Walmart. So
I've been very curious about this movie. I have a soft spot for really good Westerns, and I believe this movie could be really interesting. Depending on who you ask, people have been saying it's pure cinema, and then other people have been saying this is trash, and it definitely feels like politics are weighing in on who's saying what about this movie. So, I'm very interested though. But I could see him. I don't know. He's made some movies. Like we look back on Kevin Costner's career and say, like, the guy's not a meathead, or if he is a meathead, he's like a soulful meathead. And I don't know. I'm always kind of intrigued by what Kevin Costner represents. He's kind of this weird, like somewhere between a dramatic actor and a kind of like a dad movie actor, a star of that kind of film. So I don't know. I'm really intrigued by Horizon.
Costner's a legend, man.
I know, that's what I mean. It's like he's one of those guys. You can't really, even if you don't like something about him or something he's done, you can't just spit on everything he's done. So.
Yeah, there's no question that he's an absolute asshole. Like, I have no doubt. Like whenever I've ever heard or like interviews with people from the town and like. Doesn't mean I don't like a lot of his movies. I mean, he's made like some of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah.
And and it has definitely like stayed relevant through the years. He was in Batman vs Superman. He was in Hidden Figures. He was in Molly's Game. Like he's been in stuff still just as an actor. But yeah, you're right. Like the Yellowstone of it all, and like the what that lightning rod of that was, in pop culture and for network TV still, and the drama around him leaving, maybe not leaving, but now leaving for sure. Like
Yeah.
It is a all-time baller move to like do something like this, where you have 2 movies done and you want to make a third, and as we're recording this, the day that we're recording this, they announced that like the part 2 that was supposed to come out in August is not coming out anymore.
It's pulled.
Like,
they said they want to generate more like buzz.
Yeah, it's pulled. They
right.
pulled it from the release date next month. The one that's in theaters is underperforming significantly. So, depending how you believe Spin, it's like we want this movie to find an audience so that we can put part 2 out next year and give more time to make part 3 or whatever is going to happen with this American saga. But, it's an interesting conversation even beyond whether it's a good movie or not, because it's just like, between this and Francis Ford Coppola, like these both legends, doing these passion projects that they put a lot of their own money in. Like I think Costner put like more than like $35-40 million of his own money into this movie. It's just crazy, and for it not to work is really sad, because you want to see stuff like this work, because this is just like this is a flex, this is a shot, and this is like swinging for the fences. But I'm glad you picked this, because I want to check it out. And I mean, I know they announced the digital release of it, which I think is like next Tuesday, right?
Yeah, next Tuesday.
Already, again, a victim maybe of poor performance.
Right.
But
that's true. That was announced and already was an indication. And then today's news was the oof. I could see them saying like, the marketing sense of like 2 months isn't long enough for whatever they think might happen word of mouth with this movie, or you know what I mean? Like, it's not enough time to get that going, but it does feel like a major lack of confidence in the whole. Like you said, the sort of plan has failed. Whether the movies are good and how people see them, I know a lot of people are disappointed. People that ran out to see part 1 have said they feel kind of ripped off that they.
I kind of feel like I'm gonna like it a lot. Like Like there's
I've
something
heard a few things that sound like it's got some juice. Yeah.
I got a vibe from like people I really trust their opinion on stuff, and like I kind of feel like I might really dig it, but we'll see.
I think if this lands on Netflix and it gets the proper front page treatment, I think this could.
Well, I guess it'll go to Max, right? I mean, like it's
going to Max.
Isn't it a Warner Brothers release?
I think it is Warner's, because I think today people were talking about Warner's.
I thought it was
of the choice to.
I thought it was Saudi. I thought that's what it was. I thought it was Saudi was who.
Yeah, it's Warner Brothers New Line.
It's not Saudi. It's not.
Oh, that's in there for sure. No doubt.
It's not a Chic. It's not Chic Productions. It's not like.
Unless it's really small and fine print. Yeah, I can't read it on the poster.
Yeah.
Good pick. Nuts. Yeah, we'll talk about that on the next episode of Movie Schmovie. Again, we'll get back to our normal episodes next week. Movieschmovie.com is the website. You can go there to subscribe to the podcast. You can listen to episodes right from that page as well. And if you want the video option of the pod, you can go to youtube.com/movieschmoviepodcast. And subscribe there. And if you do that, make sure you hit the notification bell, to make sure you get alerts for when they get posted there, so you don't miss any. You guys want to say anything else? Anything else you want to mention before we wrap it up?
I just want to throw out that my musical identity, Sci-Fi, SIGHFIGH, has an album called Horrific on Bandcamp. So if you go to sci-fi.bandcamp.com and Horrific, there are 2 songs on that album inspired by the Halloween films. There's one called Loomis's Complaint, 1978, and another one called Going Back to Haddonfield, 2018. And actually I might throw one of them in as the outro music for this episode. But that's a love letter to all the films that I watched when I was younger, and it kind of goes from the 70s up till recent times, with just horror movies that not so much these are my favorites, but these are the ones that inspired songs. So cool. Mrs. Complaint and Going Back to Haddonfield, but the whole album should be fun for you. And support me. Hey, if you like this show, you want me to be happy, support me on Sci-Fi.
On those strolling high schoolers,